Welcome to the WP Builds podcast, bringing you the latest news from the WordPress community. Now, welcome your hosts, David Wormsley and Nathan Wrigley.
Hello there, and welcome once again to the WP Builds podcast. You have reached episode number 362, entitled Inside WordPress with Raitis Sevelis, UI UX, IndieStack, and Community. It was published on Thursday, the 22nd of February, 2024. My name's Nathan Wrigley, and a few bits of housekeeping just before we begin the podcast. The first thing to mention is our schedule page. If you're interested in finding out all of the different things that we're putting on each and every week, head to wpbuilds.com/schedule. Over there, you're going to find a calendar, and each of the little days that you click on, the events that you click on, will enable you to add our events to your calendar at the appropriate time. Typically, we do a This Week in WordPress show, which is live on a Monday and released as a podcast on a Tuesday. We've also got the WP Builds podcast, which is what you're listening to now. We also have our This Week in WordPress show, UI UX show, and a bunch of other assorted webinars randomly distributed throughout the month. So yeah, go over to wpbuilds.com/schedule and add those events to your calendar. If you'd like to keep in touch with us, in other words, if you'd like us to email you when we have new content, head to wpbuilds.com/subscribe and fill in the one form field on the page there, and we will keep you posted when we produce new content. There's also our social networks, YouTube channel, all of that other stuff. The other thing to mention is our advertise page. If you're interested in getting your product or service out in front of a WordPress-specific audience, we can help you with that. Head to wpbuilds.com/advertise to find out more. The WP Builds podcast is brought to you today by GoDaddy Pro. GoDaddy Pro, the home of managed WordPress hosting that includes free domain, SSL, and 24/7 support. Bundle that with the Hub by GoDaddy Pro to unlock more free benefits to manage multiple sites in one place, invoice clients, and get 30% off new purchases. You can find out more at go.me/WP Builds. Once more, go.me/WP Builds. And sincere thanks go to GoDaddy Pro for their continuing support of the WP Builds podcast. Okay, what have we got for you today? Well, it's an interview episode with Raitis Sevelis. Raitis has been on the podcast before. He is a great source of knowledge for all things WordPress. He's been in the space for absolutely ages, as you'll hear. He's worked with products like WP Bakery, Visual Composer, IndieStack, WP Raccoon. You'll find out more about those. But we have a really wide-ranging chat all about, well, the community, UI UX, accessibility, the need for plugins to focus less on commercialization and perhaps more on community. There's absolutely loads in here. It's a really broad discussion, as I say, and I hope that you enjoy it. I am joined on the podcast today by Raitis Sevelis. How are you doing, Raitis?
Hey, Nathan. I'm good. How are you?
Yeah, good. Did I get your surname right?
Yes, it's actually a rare case, and
yes.
I'm pleased with that.
Yeah, give myself a sticker for that. If you've been listening to this podcast for a long time, then you'll have heard Raitis' voice because he's been on in a number of different formats, and absolute pleasure having him back today. However, there's going to be a proportion of you who don't know who Raitis is, so let's do the introduction piece. Give you a minute or two to just say who you are, where you come from, what companies you have worked for and are working for, and all the background of WordPress, basically. So over to you. Just give us your biography, really.
Hey, well, try to be short. And I'm in WordPress for 10 years, almost. We'll celebrate that on December 1st. And I've been working as a product manager, but also involved in user interface, user experience of WP Bakery, Page Builder, Visual Composer, Website Builder, and also recently in IndieStack, which is managed WordPress hosting. My background comes from agency. Before WordPress, I worked as a UI UX designer at the local agency and also for international companies. And the cool thing about WordPress and WP Bakery is that basically I discovered both things at the same day. I was asked, hey, do you want to get involved in WP Bakery and what would you improve? So I started to look more into WordPress and WP Bakery from that perspective. Okay, what's missing in the ecosystem? Last 10 years, things changed a lot. So a lot of things happened basically in our community. Yeah. But here I am still excited about WordPress, about community, about what I am doing.
It's an amazing ecosystem to be in, really, isn't it? And I've been here for not quite as long as you, probably more like 8, maybe pushing 9 years, something like that. And there's never been a period of time where it got stale. There's never a period of time where it was like, oh, well, it's the same this year as it was last year. It really is a constant state of flux, which I suppose keeps us on our toes, but also means that you've got to try and keep up. Can we just totally segue, because we're going to talk about plugins during this podcast episode primarily and your endeavors over at WP Raccoon. But before that, you mentioned IndieStack, and you mentioned that that's a managed WordPress hosting endeavor. But could you just tell us a little bit more about that? What makes it managed WordPress hosting? What's the UVP, the unique value proposition that they've got over there? Because I'm curious. I haven't really touched on IndieStack on this podcast. So can we just go there for a few minutes?
Yes, sure. So as we all know, there are plenty of different hosting companies for WordPress specifically. But what we discovered is that for an average user who is not that much into WordPress community, maybe not that technical, hosting can be a bit of a nightmare. And of course, not everyone can afford developer, or sometimes developer just passes things over to the client. And what we wanted basically to do is to make a hosting platform that is super cool for developers, have all the developer grade features, but at the same time offers user interface and simplicity that, these days is appreciated by Wix users, by Squarespace users, because when we look on WordPress in general, it is a bit of technical still. For an average user, it is not that easy to get into WordPress because of different user interfaces. And basically, as Forbes said, you need to know how to code or be a bit advanced to handle WordPress. So we want to fill that gap. We want to make sure that at least when it comes to hosting, any person is able to configure their WordPress website without, reading books about it.
I got to say, if you go to, as you might imagine, the URL is IndieStack.com. So that's INDY stack, all as one word, IndieStack.com. There's some illustrations there. Well, not illustrations. There's some photographs, I guess, of the dashboard, and it just looks really nice. It just looks really professional and up to the minute, which is, it can't be said for certain other implementations. Every time I see cPanel these days, I sort of scratch my head and think, how does anybody navigate that these days? But there you go. I'm sure if you've got muscle memory there, it's very easy to do. But IndieStack's endeavor then is that you basically, it looks like on your pricing at least, you have an option to set up one site, and so presumably your pitch is towards people, as you said, who are fairly inexperienced with WordPress. At the minute, that's priced at $14.99 per month or $165, give or take a few cents per annum, and that allows you to have one site, 10 gigabytes of storage, which in all honesty, if you step over that with one site, you're probably doing something wrong. 10 gigabytes is an awful lot of data. And you offer support and malware scanning and backups and all of those kind of things. And then there's options for other agency things. So is the endeavor then really that if I was an inexperienced WordPress user, I come along, click a few buttons, pay my money, and I'm good to go. I've got a website. So in a way, it's like a SaaS experience, like a Wix or a Squarespace type experience, but WordPress is installed along the way.
To some extent, yes, actually. We, of course, you mentioned that the pricing represents more of an average business person who just wants to launch their website. But we also work with agencies that that create multiple sites. So for them, we have different packages available for their growth and so on. What is interesting about IndieStack? The two things. First, you can easily transfer website to your client. So client will have the ownership, while agency or developer will still have access. And for developers who are just starting to work with clients, with WordPress maybe, we offer build for free option, which means you can create a site for free and even showcase that to your client, collaborate there. And then once the site is ready, you basically transfer it to the client and the client starts to pay for that. So for many developers, maybe from developing countries, that's great money saver. So you don't have to pay anything while you are developing.
Wait, that is interesting. I don't think I've heard that before. That's fascinating. Okay, so if I'm a developer, okay, so let's say I've got an agency and I'm building WordPress websites for people. What you're saying is that with IndieStack, I could spend a year. Let's just pick an extraordinarily large amount of time out of thin air. I could spend a year developing that site on my side of IndieStack. I don't know if there's cost involved with that or whether that's a free service at that point. And then I transfer it to the client who then takes control, but I could still, in theory, have access to developing that. So, yeah, that's really interesting.
Yeah, exactly. Of course, we are now playing around with the period, talking to developers to understand what's the average period for development that is required. Because, of course, so we have costs on our side to support that. So we want to find the best period for that development environment. But currently, yes, there are no limits. So everyone is welcome.
That's really interesting. And how do you differentiate between a live site and a development site? Is it that the URL is some pseudo random string, so rather than it being example.com, it's xyz321.indiestack.com or something like that. And obviously it's unusable to the client in that way.
We do have a subdomain for development purposes. And of course we add the hash just to make sure that the URL is unique from the point of security. Maybe you don't want the site to be exposed, but you can share that site with the client. So with the link, the site is accessible.
Okay, that's really interesting. I love the premise of that. So obviously, I made up a year. Maybe that's an exaggeration, but if you typically turn things around, let's say, I don't know, in a month or something like that, then that's a really credible offering, isn't it? The idea that you could do that completely for free, demonstrate it all to your clients, get it all signed off, and then click some buttons in the UI and you're off. IndieStack is taking over. Sorry, I'm so fascinated by this. I'm going to keep talking about IndieStack. That's all right. One other thing I want to ask is where, I'm presuming it's a layer on top of some infrastructure, I don't know, maybe it's Google Cloud or Amazon AWS or Azure or something like that. Is that the case? Or is it that you've got your own servers? Let's just talk about that for a minute. Where is this infrastructure actually based?
Yes, so we are using existing infrastructure. Right now, it's DigitalOcean Kubernetes.
Oh, nice. Yep.
But we also now looking into Google Cloud, their Kubernetes offer. So things may change, but of course, only for good.
Okay, nice. Okay, well, that's absolutely fascinating. Well, thanks for that. So one last time, indiestack.com. If you want to look at the pricing, it's /pricing. And go check that out if that's piqued your interest. We're going to talk about something else, and I'm going to divert you to another different website. I'm going to divert you to one called WP Raccoon. Again, exactly as you'd imagine, WP Raccoon, RACOON .co, not .com, it's .co. And you're going to find all sorts of articles and information. But I confess I don't know too much about WP Raccoon, so that's going to be my first point of contact. Raitis, is this your endeavor? Is this a company endeavor? What is WP Raccoon, and if it's yours, what was the point in launching it?
Yes, so the first thing to mention, it's with one C. That's not a typo. The domain was actually taken, so I had to figure something out.
Oh, is raccoon to tradition? Is it usually got two C's? I didn't know that. Oh, okay, that's good to point out. Thank you.
Yeah, that's my side project. At some point, you see, there are things you want to discuss, you want to investigate, research, and of course share results with others. Not everything could go under Visual Composer, WP Baker, or IndieStack blog. It just doesn't fit there from the content perspective. So I decided why not to build a community on Facebook that can discuss plugins, discuss business around and inside WordPress. And of course, based on that, WP Raccoon was made to make sure that I have a platform where I can publish some of my researches regarding themes and plugins. And during those 10 years, there are things that are interesting to me that I'm also able to share with my audience.
I think that's a really smart move, because I often think to myself about WP builds. I often think, wouldn't it be nice if we could stray outside of WordPress for a couple of episodes and talk about non-WordPressy things? But given the nature of what I've set up, I've kind of strapped myself in there a bit, and I can't really do that because my audience is only WordPress, which is fine. I'm entirely happy with that, but it does mean that I'm limited in that sense. And also, you know, if you, as a person working for a variety of different companies, if you only ever produce that content on their platform, should you ever move on from one company to another, your content is sort of siloed over there. So I think that's a really smart move to set up something that's completely independent that you own. And it's not to say that you will move away from any of those companies. It's just nice to have your own space where you can have your own thoughts and be your authentic self. So yeah, good idea from my point of view, I think.
Yeah, and you know, my thoughts sometimes can be controversial, and of course I don't want to make anyone think that even if I'm thinking a bit differently, that's the whole politics of the company I am working for. I have to some extent full ability to share anything that comes to my mind.
Yeah. Do you have to be? Again, sorry, I'm sort of straying into some really unusual area. But do you, given that you do have an IndieStack hat and that you do have a WP Bakery and Visual Composer hat, do you have to, even on your own website, is there some intuition in your head which is saying, no, don't write that? You know, because even though I want to write that and that's my authentic thought, I probably will cause a bit of chaos, and the fallout from that will be, you know, something that I don't want to deal with.
Of course, yes. You need to balance and you need to think. And of course, when I'm thinking about the content, first of all, I'm thinking about the content that can contribute to one of the products. And if there is, okay, this is the content that could not help the goal to reach the goals that we want for one of the products, then is it the content that I'm still interested in and I want to push it live? And then, of course, there are things that you may write about, or maybe you would skip. That's just how it works.
Yeah, I know. You've got to be careful. It doesn't matter where you are. You've got to be careful. So WP Raccoon, then obviously there's this website where you've got a load of articles, but also in the main navigation at the top, we can click on the community link, and the community takes us over to a Facebook group. Now, I was once incredibly engaged with Facebook, and for my own reasons, I've sort of stepped away from that a little bit. Just, you know, there's just thoughts in my head which are not worth sharing. And I'm just wondering, what do you feel about that? Are you happy to sort of silo your content within Facebook? Maybe you're not. Maybe there's no unique content going there. It's just links and a community. How do you feel about, Facebook as a whole, as a place to put your community? Because there's probably a lot of people listening to this who would love to have a community, whether it's WordPress or not. How's that going?
Well, to me, Facebook probably was always the main point of communicating with my friends, family, and work related, and also WordPress community. Of course, I'm registered on many social networks, just name it. But you just can't spend your time on everywhere. So what I figured out that Facebook basically works for me well. That's the one point of truth where I can basically work and spend my leisure time. As for other networks, it's tricky. From time to time, I try different social networks, but the main point is that it requires effort on my side. And as you mentioned, I'm sitting on several chairs: WP Bakery, Visual Composer, IndieStack, WP Raccoon, of course, family, and now recently I started to give lectures at the local university.
Oh, because you weren't busy enough, Raitis, yeah.
So, yeah, well, Facebook just works, let it put that way.
Yeah, it was just, I have no axe to grind particularly about Facebook. I just got a little bit, I just found it was so compelling that I would sink so much time into Facebook, and eventually some realization dawned on me that I just thought, boy, if I spent even half the amount of time on Facebook doing other stuff that probably I ought to be doing, then I'd be significantly more productive. So it was my inability to restrain myself, which was really the cause. So as I said, no axe to grind, but go to the community tab if you're interested in engaging with Raitis and the WP Raccoon community, and you are a Facebook member. Then you can go over there. But let's turn our attention to your history with WordPress in terms of plugins, because I want to point to a particular article that I noticed on your website about the thing that we all love, WordPress plugins, and all of the different pieces. So you've got a big backstory, 10 years or thereabouts, dealing with WordPress, and it seems like it's growing. The WordPress marketplace is over 60,000 at the moment, plus goodness knows how many commercial plugins. What wisdom have you got for us in the ecosystem of WordPress plugins?
Yeah, that's a hard question. You have to think where to start. Well, what I learned, and that's probably the main thing, that if you have an idea for the plugin, just don't wait to polish the plugin. Once you create, release it and talk to people, talk to community, ask for feedback. Maybe it will work, maybe it won't. But there's, just like with any startup, you don't have to wait for some special date, or wait when you think that the product, when your plugin is ready. The sooner you get it to the masses, the better.
Yeah, it's an interesting conundrum, that, isn't it? Because given what I now do, I've become a target for email campaigns from people with new plugins, because, I have a podcast and people would like to come on the podcast and share the plugin. And it's quite interesting to me how professional the WordPress plugin ecosystem has become. And so now so you've said launch it, build it, launch it, get on with it. It kind of feels to me like nowadays you also have to not just launch it from the code side, you also have to really think very carefully about the marketing of a plugin, because I think that we're so exposed as WordPress users to slick, incredibly beautiful websites with very well thought out messaging and all of that, a fabulous logo, a fabulous website, copy which just speaks to me and explains my problem back to me and all of that kind of thing. So I just wondered, over the 10 years, if you've noticed that increasing professionalization, I don't even know if that's a word, but the increasing professional nature of launching a plugin, such that even if you've got an idea and you want to launch it, maybe you need to think about that piece as well.
Yeah, of course, marketing is always a huge thing, but at the same time, I think what also is happening is that finally we see that before people try to stick everything into one plugin, it's like all in one thing. Now we're seeing that plugins that succeed solve one thing, but solve it really good. And this is probably the key to success, because it's not a bad thing to have plenty of plugins installed on your WordPress site, despite what anyone is telling. If those plugins are developed properly, so there is no footprint on performance or anything. So just make sure to have a quality product installed on your WordPress site that solves your problems. And this is what plugin and also theme developers should keep in mind.
I think it's really hard to be the company that rises to the top. So the build it and they will come days, probably in the 2010s, 2011s up to, 2016, 17, something like that. Launch a plugin and people will migrate and flock to it. I feel that moment may have passed now, because as is in your infographic, with 60,000 plugins, if you're developing, let's pick something out of thin air. If you're developing a calendar booking plugin or something like that, it's fairly safe to say that there's probably half a dozen, maybe even a dozen competitors already. Whereas back in the early 2000s and, 2010, what have you, you could probably pick something fairly innovative and be more or less guaranteed that you were going to be the only person, where now I think that's more of a struggle. So I think that feeds into the bit that I was saying about marketing it, is that you are going to have to figure out what your competition are doing and figure out how they're positioning it and what their website looks like and how they're speaking to their clients and so on. So yeah, the competition seems to be heating up.
That's definitely looking on competitors or potential competitors. That's part of product development research phase. You have to know what's good, what's bad about existing solutions. And your goal is basically to come with a solution yourself that addresses these things. This is probably one of the keys to success. And of course, then communicate with the community why your solution is, I wouldn't call it better, but different from the existing ones. So, and then it comes down, if there is an audience, and that's something you should also answer during the research phase. If there is an audience that requires that specific feature or case to be solved, then it's all good, and you will definitely find your market.
Yeah, I guess it's just a question of launching it, doing your research beforehand, and hoping that things come out that the audience do discover you. Obviously, there are things like blogs to be partnered with, and podcasts to come on, and videos to be made, and all of that kind of stuff. But I still feel that it's a really healthy place to be, even though it may be more difficult than ever. And I also feel that the pricing is becoming more realistic. Over the last several years, we've heard people talking repeatedly about, don't assume that nobody's going to be willing to pay more than $49 a year or $100 a year or whatever. I feel that is becoming more typical, higher pricing. So obviously you can get away with having less customers if that's the case. I was reading an article I can't actually remember where it was. It may well have been, it was in the Post Status blog, I think it was. And it was Marika van der Acht, who was until recently the CEO of Yoast. And she's now moved away, and her and her husband, Joost, from Yoast, have set up a venture capital fund called Emilia. And she made the point that she feels that the WordPress community is kind of splitting itself in two a little bit. On the one hand, there's the people who view the project not as a money-making enterprise. They're viewing it as a community thing. They want to contribute to the core of the product. They want to attend WordPress events just to be with other like-minded people. And then over the last period of time, let's say decade or more, businesses have stepped in and commoditized everything. And she feels that the community is sort of being ripped into two halves. and that they're becoming further and further apart and finding it more and more difficult to talk to each other. And I wondered if you had any thoughts on that, really, whether or not you've noticed that sort of same trend. Have you been attending WordPress events and thinking, boy, everybody here is trying to sell me something, as opposed to, oh, everybody's here is trying to just talk about WordPress, which is nice?
Yes, of course. And I totally agree. That there are people that create products just to make money. And that's the wrong approach. And when people approach you with that, you can smell it.
Yeah,
I think the best products that came to WordPress and in general, they were about solving issues for good. Just the products that were just developed for the community to feel good, to be useful. And this is how you get to masses. This is how your product becomes popular. You can't really think from day one, okay, I'm going to make money. If your product is great, if it's made for people, if it satisfies everyone, and you're not that pushy, not just walking around and selling it, then success will be there. And I know that for WP Bakery, for example, it wasn't about money. It was about solving specific issue. When people wanted to create more advanced layouts, they were struggling with writing shortcodes. So there we had that interface, visual interface to make that happen. It was not about from day one just to make money. It was a product that was actually made to complement our own WordPress themes. So a bit different approach.
Yeah, interesting. So again, I'm going to keep that thread going a little bit. I'm looking at your infographic once more, and I'm seeing that of the 60,000, so I don't know exactly when that infographic was created, whether or not it's, it's one of your most recent blog posts, so I'm guessing it was reasonably recent. 60,000 plugins are available on WordPress.org, or more than 60,000. I don't know what the exact number is. It probably rises inexorably. But 39 of them are really incredibly successful. 39 of those plugins have over 1 million active installs, which that's actually mind-numbing, isn't it, when you actually think about it? 39 products have got 1 million active installs. So that's from the repo, so that's the free version. But you also draw the conclusion that 95% of those plugins offer some sort of agency-grade license. So in other words, there's the free version on WordPress.org, and there's the paid version. I had no intuition that it was as big as that. Honestly, if you'd asked me, I'd have said it was more like 50-50. So that's quite surprising to me that almost every plugin has a vehicle to make money off the back of it. That's somewhat surprising.
Yes, totally agree. When I was working on that infographic, of course, some data came in and that was surprised. Like, oh, okay, well, didn't know that. But on the other hand, like how plugins are getting popular. So you have to please WordPress developers, agencies, people that are creating websites or solutions for others. So once the agency starts to work with your product, they, of course, deliver it to the clients, and these can be non-technical people. But then later on, they decided that they need another website. So they are familiar with your product. So they will choose your product. They will maybe, if they are working with some new agency, they will tell that agency that, hey, we want that product. And this is how you grow your business, your plugin business or theme business. So, of course, as a WordPress product developer, you have to think how to make sure that your product is a good fit for agencies and developers.
Yeah, I guess the adage here is that a rising tide carries all boats with it. So if WordPress's user base continues to rise, then it's okay for the number of plugins in the marketplace to go up and all of that. However, I wonder, in the more recent past, stagnation is really the wrong word, but we seem to have seen a sort of a turnaround a little bit. So rather than that number continually going up into the mid 40s and approaching 50% of the CMS marketplace, we seem to see it stalling and perhaps going down 1 or 2 percentage points. So maybe there's a little trouble ahead. I don't know if you've got any intuitions on that, whether you believe that WordPress will continue to gain traction in the market, or whether or not maybe its heyday has gone.
It is, as you said, it is still growing, but also you mentioned that it is slowing down a bit. And if recently I was talking at the WordPress meetup in Lithuania, and I had the data that if you compare growth for the last 3 years, WordPress has grew something around 15%.
Wow.
While, for example, Wix, Squarespace, Weebly, Shopify, their growth rate is around 50%, 75%.
Wow.
And of course, they are like far behind. But still, what will happen next? They can get closer, and this is the question of how ready we are. What do we do about making WordPress accessible and available to more people? Because there was this Forbes review, which is of course out of the community scope, where we as WordPress users please WordPress. So it was independent, and they were telling that hey, WordPress is really great. The flexibility is there, and you can create anything. But at the same article, they were mentioning that if you want to create something more advanced, or maybe a bit out of the box, then you need to know how to code. Then you need to be technical. And if we look on a regular WordPress site, there are 25 different plugins on average, plus minus. So in many cases, that's 25 different user interfaces and user experience.
Yeah.
So for an average person who is non-technical, and who are those people that are deciding either they should go to WordPress or maybe stick with Wix, that's a deal breaker often. So we need to basically address those things, not only WordPress core. So guys are working on the new admin panel, which is something I'm really waiting for.
It looks great. There are bits of it which I can't see working in the implementation that I've seen in the screenshots, but boy, do we need that. We need some refresh there, don't we?
We need the last update of like a major update in admin panel was actually almost 10 years ago. The day I joined WordPress. So the difference, I haven't seen really much of a difference.
In the entirety of the time I've used WordPress, I think the only modification has been a modification from a dark blue to a sort of paler blue in active states on links. That's about the only thing I can point to. Everything else is about the same. Anyway, sorry, I interrupted. Carry on.
Yeah, but I would say there is also this top navigation bar that was added later on. But the version 3.0 was when the last major update happened. Yeah. So I'm really waiting for that, and that should help. And if product people stick more to consistency when it comes to user interface, not only talk, but work with accessibility, this should improve.
I think this is such an important discussion, because if we want WordPress to maintain, let's even imagine that we don't want it to grow. We just want it to stay where it is. Let's in the low 40% of the CMS market. I feel the onboarding of WordPress needs to be for a typical non-developer user. It needs to be really straightforward. And so obviously things like IndieStack are taking that on. You know, you come over here and you click some buttons in a nice UI and there's your WordPress website. But then that piece of the puzzle seems to be being solved by the market. But now, when we get into the WordPress admin, as you said, it is looking tired compared to commercial rivals, Wix, Squarespace, and all of that, who have really, really beautiful UIs. And they're in charge of all of that, so they can update it on an annual, weekly, whatever basis. But then, like you said, it's really confusing when you go in and your form plugin hijacks the entire interface, and it's got a different set of fonts. The buttons all look different. And you're thinking, what have I bought here? What is this? Is this still WordPress or is this something else? And then you go to your, I don't know, whatever plugin you've got for whatever task, and it looks different. So I think the endeavors to update the admin UI so that it looks modern and it competes visually from a UI UX perspective with the commercial rivals, that's really important. But I really think that it's incumbent upon all the developers of plugins to try and come to some consensus about the way things are going to look. I don't know if you saw recently, I'm back to Yoast again, they released their sort of UI kit because they were sort of so fed up, I guess is the right word. They were so fed up with the limitations that they had within WordPress. They wanted something more modern, so they released that and open sourced it. Whether or not that'll get taken on, we'll have to see. But the idea that a non-technical end user would come in and not be confused by WordPress is just unrealistic. I wonder how many people have walked away from WordPress within minutes just going, I just hate the way this looks. I don't know what I'm doing. It's all very confusing.
Yes, and I totally agree with that. It can be confusing, and it all comes down to shoulders of product people and community, of course, and also core developers. So core developers basically can give a bit more instruments, a bit more like UI components that can be used by product people to create their own user interface. Because why people choose to create their own user interface? Because of lack of those default components.
Right.
On the community side, it's all about creating content that educate people, and of course doing some extra steps. Sometimes, as simple as helping your clients assign domains to their hosting services. So simple thing, but for an average person, that could be a nightmare.
Yeah. Yeah, I think this is the problem of our time, actually, in the WordPress community. I think this is the piece which needs to be tackled. Yeah, there's a few others which you could throw in the mix. There's all sorts of projects which need addressing, but this one does feel like a really important one if we want the community to grow. So, dear listener, a question for you. If I was to ask you how many plugins as a percentage come from the United States, I wonder what your answer would be. I would have gone for something like 30%, something like that. Raitis, your investigation leads us. This is phenomenal. 60% of plugins herald from the US. I honestly would have thought places like India would have been capturing giant chunks of that, because I see plugins coming at such an incredible pace from places like India and what have you. I'm surprised by that, and I wonder if that's in decline. I wonder if we were to go back a few years, if 70% would have been the case, and it's going to dwindle over time.
I was surprised by that number as well. So I guess that's we don't have that historic data. Well, I don't have that historic data, but I guess that the percentage was higher since WordPress initially came from the United States. Let it put that way. But of course, there are new products that come from Europe, from Asia, all around the world. So this percentage of market dominating by the US companies will change. At the same time, we see plenty of acquisitions happening in WordPress, and usually that's bigger player taking under their wings some new exciting products. I don't have data, but I guess that the majority of those large companies still come from the US. So that's also how this percentage gets determined.
Yeah, really interesting. I would imagine if we were to revisit this conversation in 5 years, hopefully the number of plugins will have gone up and the community will have grown, but also I imagine that number from the US will have gone down, and we'll be looking at different countries taking a more pivotal role. Some other data which I'll just throw at you because it's really interesting from this, and then we'll get some less satisfactory data which is buried at the end of the infographic. Roughly 50% of plugins that have an upsell use Woo or EDD in order to get their plugin into your hands. That comes as no surprise. I wonder what the other 50% are using. They're probably rolling it in their own way, using something like Freemius or, I don't know, PayPal or Paddle or something like that. 0.61% of users leave a review on WordPress.org. Oh boy. You go to all this effort to promote your channel on WordPress.org, and less than just over half of 1% will be leaving a review. 58% offer 14 or 30-day refund policies. That's quite nice. 26% do not offer any refund option at all. That's kind of interesting and a bit strange. 60. Oh Lord, I don't like this statistic. Only 60% of plugins. 60% keep their plugins updated. That is astonishing. So there's 40% out there which are not getting updated either because they've stopped in development and they're no longer being used, or they just released it and kind of walked away from it. That's alarming. I'm going to pass that one over to you.
So there's two sides of a coin. Of course, if for maintaining your WordPress plugin, you need to have resources, and if your product is not that popular, if it serves like a really small niche, at some point you either sell it or you just can't really maintain it from the business perspective. So that's worrying, but this is how life goes. So what can be done there is maybe opening that a bit more to the community. So I guess there are people in the community that would love to contribute to some specific plugin, maybe because they are using it or they like the idea and so on. So this is how we can make sure that really good niche plugins don't die at the end of the day.
Yeah, 60% though. I'm surprised. It's as low as that. I would have thought the updating would have been much more regular. I suppose that's a bit of caveat emptor, buyer beware. When you're buying plugins, it's up to you to do your due diligence and check out what the history is and what that company is about and how long they've been doing things, and check the change log and all of those kind of things to see how updated they are. But you're right, what's the point in banging your head against a plugin that's only got a handful of installs and you simply cannot keep it going? That's part of the nature of the beast. If we were in the SaaS landscape, that would simply stop working and you wouldn't have access to it. At least in the WordPress space, you could fork it, I suppose, if you wanted, and keep it updated yourself if it's pivotal to your business. One last statistic just before we knock it on the head, and this is so depressing, for want of a better word. 90% of plugins do not pass accessibility tests. Accessibility seems like the conversation of the moment. It feels like 3 years ago we were all talking about core web vitals, and before that other things. But now it seems that accessibility has taken the helm. I'm hoping that this statistic comes down because this is such an important topic.
I think there is no other way. Because from the government perspective, we have new rules introduced from time to time that pushes actually people to address accessibility issues. And also, I was thinking about accessibility wrong for a very long time, because to me, accessibility issues were related to people with let's say, some really huge disabilities. But recent data shows that 30% of people over 50 in the US experience some sort of disability, which may restrict them from using some products that are not really addressing accessibility issues. And these are huge numbers. And everyone who is younger, let's say, and using WordPress, after 30, 20, 10 years, you will get to the point where you have those 30% chance to also have accessibility issues. So that's basically, when you think about accessibility, you think about solving problems not only for others, but also solving problems for yourself in the future.
Yeah, we've touched on this topic on so many occasions on the podcast. We've had all sorts of people coming on talking about how to make your website accessible, but I don't think we've ever really covered off the how to make your plugin accessible. So that in itself is quite an interesting subject. But I do feel, like you alluded to there, I feel the law is going to be the driving force here, because certainly in the UK and in Europe and North America, I can't really speak for other parts of the world, I just don't know. The law is going to at some point firm up to the point where you really won't be able to get away with this. If you endeavor to have a product online, you might even find yourself at the end of a lawsuit if you don't do this. So I'm encouraged that statistic is not 100%, but let's hope that if you produce this infographic again at some point in the near future, it will start to drive down and be, even if that's driven by a stick and not a carrot, if the law is the thing that forces you to do it. But nevertheless, that's still at this point a fairly disheartening statistic. I think we've gone through the infographic. So, Raitis, we've got to about 50 minutes roughly. Wow. Where does the time go when we record these episodes? I have no idea. Raitis, where would we find you? We've heard about IndieStack, we've heard about WP Bakery and Visual Composer, and obviously WP Raccoon. You mentioned that you're on all the socials. If we're keen to chat to you, what's the best way? Is it good old email, or is it Twitter, or whatever it's called nowadays?
Well, I would say if you want to reach out, first you can knock on any doors of IndieStack, Visual Composer, and WP Bakery. If you have some general questions, you can ask right away through the channels available there, or just specifically mention, hey, I want to talk to Raitis.
Nice.
I will be there. Also, of course, WP Raccoon community on Facebook.
Yes.
This is probably where you can reach out easily. I have a Facebook tab opened throughout the day, and one of the first things I do in the morning, I'm checking out what's happening. That's my sometimes source of news, and also making sure that, planning out my day, and seeing whom I should talk to, and so on.
I have no idea how you get anything done with Facebook open. That is literally, that's for me, that's absolutely going to destroy my day. So bravo for you for being able to be so self-disciplined. That's amazing. That is, by the way, it's a URL which is easy to remember. If you want to join the WP Raccoon, it's facebook.com/groups, plural, /WP Raccoon with 1 C and 2 O's. So go and join them there, or go to any of the other places where you can find Raitis. Raitis Sevelis, thank you so much for chatting to me on the podcast today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Nathan. It was a pleasure as always.
You're very, very kind.
Well, I hope that you enjoyed that. Very nice chatting to Raitis. What a wide-ranging discussion that was. If you have any commentary about that, please feel free to head over to wpbuilds.com, search for episode number 362, and leave us a comment there. It seems so worthwhile to use the WordPress commenting system rather than posting it all over on social media. So I would implore you, do that. 362 is the episode. Go search for that at wpbuilds.com. The WP Builds podcast is brought to you today by GoDaddy Pro. GoDaddy Pro, the home of managed WordPress hosting that includes free domain, SSL, and 24/7 support. Bundle that with the Hub, by GoDaddy Pro to unlock more free benefits to manage multiple sites in one place, invoice clients, and get 30% off new purchases. You can find out more at go.me/WP Builds. Once more, go.me/WP Builds. And sincere thanks go to GoDaddy Pro for their continuing support of the WP Builds podcast. Okay, that's all I've got for you today. I really hope that you enjoyed it. Don't forget, head over to our schedule page, wpbuilds.com/schedule, if you want to find out what's going on with WP Builds this week. If you want to advertise on WP Builds, head to wpbuilds.com/advertise. That is all that I've got for you this week. We'll see you at some point, hopefully during the course of the next 7 days. If not, no worries, but stay safe. Have a good week. Bye-bye for now.